McCuistion, for over 28 years talking about things that matter with people who care. Production of McCuistion is made possible in part by individual viewers, supporters of the Foundation for Responsible Television, the University of Texas at Dallas, creating the future.
Well, welcome to the program. Obviously, I'm Dennis McCuistion. I'm sitting here with my co-host, Jim Falk. Jim, nice to see you.
Good to be here, and it certainly is a timely, interesting topic. It
is. Whistleblowing. It follows up a program we did earlier in the year on something called fraud. So let's see what we're going to be talking about on whistleblowing. You know, whistleblower, in case you don't know, is someone who exposes fraud or ethical wrongdoing in organizations, usually after trying to fix the problem in the organization first. They put their careers in jeopardy by doing so. On a prior program, we looked at why people commit fraud and ways to prevent it. Today, we'll examine how frauds are exposed and the risk that whistleblowers take in the process. Now, joining us from Italy is journalist Tom Mueller, who wrote this book, Crisis of Conscience, Whistleblowing in an Age of Fraud. Tom, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Dennis. Good to be here.
Marianne Jennings joins us here in the studio. Marianne is Professor Emeritus of Legal and Ethical Studies at Arizona State University and the author of a little book called The 7 Signs of Ethical Collapse, as I recall. And Marianne, you were on that other program on fraud as well. Can you give that viewer just a brief summary of what we talked about so we'll bring them up to speed?
Well, we focused a lot on organizations where you have gigantic accounting frauds, you have frauds related to research data and pharmaceuticals, you have frauds related to products and what they do and what they don't do. And what happens is people in organizations sort of get this psychological factor going where it feels like you're doing your job, even though you're looking at it and saying, oh, doesn't feel right. And so you have this organizational culture that influences the decisions people make, along with the fact that there's compensation, there's rewards, there are promotions that go with it. And so these decisions just sort of spiral out of control until you have a headline and then it's managed. And usually there's a whistleblower at the level of too much fraud. We've gone too far now. And so it begins very small with the misrepresentations, the accounting treatments, those kinds of things, and continues to grow until the headline.
Tom, it's good to see you again. Thank you for joining us. And I can imagine why it took you 7 years to write your book, because whistleblowing is not a new topic. It really goes back to the origins of our country, doesn't it?
It certainly does, and I'm always amazed when people talk about whistleblowers as snitches or traitors or unpatriotic in certain cases. I mean, one of the very first whistleblower laws was passed by the Continental Congress in 1778 when 10 military whistleblowers from the U.S. Navy came and reported their supreme commander, the Commodore of the U.S. Navy, for dereliction of duty and abuse of British prisoners. And not only did the Congress not jail them or call them traitors, they passed a law stating it was the right and duty of all citizens of the Republic to report wrongdoing by public officials. And they even paid their legal fees and made sure they had the documents to prove their wrongdoing by the Commodore. So that's a very early example of government whistleblowing. And then we have corporate whistleblowing. None other than Abraham Lincoln in 1863 during the height of the Civil War, when he discovered, horror of horrors, that defense contractors were robbing the Union Army blind. He helped to pass a law, the Lincoln Law, or the False Claims Act, that allowed individual citizens to become private attorneys general and prosecute fraud on behalf of all of their fellow citizens. One of the most powerful forcing mechanisms that we have, and certainly one of the most powerful tools against fraud that the Department of Justice has today. Those two paradigm whistleblower laws were passed by some of the most respected presidents and figures in American history.
Now, why at times do people tend to think that a whistleblower is a traitor or someone that has really not represented the company appropriately?
Well, when we get into groups, and particularly highly charged groups with a mission and a visionary leader, We tend to see the world in a real tunnel vision. We tend to see us and them. We are wired to see in groups and out groups. This goes back millions of years of our evolutionary history. We have been wired to be good to our internal team and tough, if not lethal, to outsiders. Now, when someone within the group, no matter how bad the group is behaving, even a mafia turncoat, when someone turns against their own members, everyone, besides the whistleblower, typically has the same reaction. You are a traitor. You have been freeloading and taking advantage of all the things that we've been doing, all the things that we've been creating, and now you're turning on us. Quite often people lose sight, as Marianne has pointed out. The slippery slope allows you to lose sight of just how bad your behavior has become. And when someone calls it out, you get outraged. And at the same time, your conscience gets a little bit of an ice pick because they're telling you what you sort of know, but prefer not to think about. And that is your bonus and your career and your stellar performance is based on fraudulent behavior.
Yeah, it's interesting, Tom, that your book is Whistleblowing in an Age of Fraud. And here are three women who were wonderful whistleblowers dating back to 2002, 2003, Marianne. And that's back in the Enron days when you and I first met. And they blew the whistle, one of them for Enron, one of them for WorldCom, and one of them actually for the FBI. A good thing we don't have any problems there anymore. That's
been solved.
Yeah, that's been solved, of course. But what is it that gets people to the point where they will, I guess, take a chance, expose themselves? Because as I mentioned in the beginning, I think most people try to fix things in-house before they go public. Am I right or wrong about that?
No, I think they do. And I think Tom's book does an excellent job on all of his examples of illustrating these were people who were trying every avenue they knew to solve a problem. And they just could not because the culture had so consumed them. And then I think there's another factor that we kind of have to look at here, and I call it the prisoners of each other factor, that when we start this stuff, however small it is, and I always say with students, should I clock in with for someone who's late getting to work? And they don't want to be ostracized by the culture and say, well, you're a mean person. But at the same time, once you clock in for somebody else, they know something about you, you know something about them, and they never stop with just one time or one request. So in these gigantic frauds that we have going on, there are a lot of people that have a lot of information about others, and so everybody's afraid to move. So that when they raise it internally, it becomes really difficult for anybody to do anything because, well, yeah, but then I'll have to admit that I did this. And so it just sort of gets consumed within that culture. And so from that comes the whistleblower. And this is a person who just can't take it anymore. They're willing to put everything on the line and just risk it because it's just too wrong. They can't cope with it anymore. And I suspect that all along the way they were suffering with this, but it was just that they were caught in an area, you know, that's like Serpico when he was the honest cop and went in and they said, you know, who are you? You're the problem. This is the way we do things here, but frustrated.
Tom, you go into considerable detail about the profile of a whistleblower, and I know stereotypes and generalizations are dangerous, but are there certain personality characteristics that one sees with whistleblowers?
Yes, Jim. I think that, I mean, it may be a factor to a certain extent of which personalities and which stories I was attracted to, but in my 200-odd interviews with whistleblowers, a number of characteristics came out. One, they tend to be pretty black and white about ethics. It's not a gray area. It's not a matter of interpretation. This is the right way to do things or the legal way to do things, and this is wrong. And everything outside of the right way to do things is just wrong. Secondly, they tend to be sticklers for rules, and this can be a positive thing. Obviously, it's a very positive thing because it pushes them to become whistleblowers, but it can also probably be pretty difficult in a team. They're not team players, let's say, and I think we really overrate team play as the ultimate quality of a coworker. We need to think of ethics as the ultimate quality of a coworker. But perhaps more than anything else, I got a sense. I would always ask, after hearing really often the horror story of a whistleblower, I would say, would you do it again? And there would be a long pause, and they typically look down and kind of look into their souls a bit, and then they'd say, of course, because I have to look at myself in the mirror every morning. One woman said, I had to do that, or I couldn't put my children to bed at night. There's something that being true to themselves meant taking this quite often very dramatic step, and otherwise they simply could not live with themselves.
We have to have a video clip, Tom, of one of the guys you interviewed. His name is Dick Bowen, and he's one of my favorite guys, and he's sometimes known as the Citigroup whistleblower. So when we're ready, let's run that video.
Ask many times, what led me to become a whistleblower? And I didn't consciously become a whistleblower. I had been given a huge promotion, a brand new position, where I was responsible to make sure the mortgages we were buying and selling met our policy guidelines. And so I was really just trying to do my job, trying to get it fixed. I thought it was my job. And I started issuing warnings. This process was I would issue warnings on a regular basis. I would put it in my weekly report. I made committee presentations. And this went on for a year and a half. And it began dawning on me that despite my very explicit warnings and the jeopardy that it placed the company in, no one was paying attention. And that's when I decided to go to the board of directors. I don't know that there was ever any admission to me that that fraud was going on. But basically, the employees, there was a very strong incentive compensation plan, and it was tied to the individual goals throughout the company. And so in essence, the management was incented not to pay attention to my warnings, because if they did, they would have had to have curtailed this very profitable business model of buying and selling mortgages. And that would have meant no one met their goals, and therefore incentive compensation for everyone would have been cut. Now, again, no one admitted fraud to me. But this is where I basically had to go to the outside, to the SEC and the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission. This was a very difficult period in time. And I'm asked many times, was it worth it? I will tell you that being a whistleblower will take a huge toll on you, and it's a very personal decision. It can take a toll on your family. It can take a toll on all of your loved ones. It can take a toll on your professional life. As a matter of fact, I tell anyone considering this that becoming a whistleblower, you are basically blowing up your career in whatever industry that you're in. I'm also asked, would you do this again? And I've got to tell you, yes, I would do this again. At least by going through this process, we received some recognition in the press and hopefully in the population that a large part of the financial crisis was caused by the massive fraud that was going on. And it wasn't just at Citigroup. This was going on throughout all of the banks. So we did accomplish something. And if asked, would you do this again? Yes, I would. It was wrong. Someone has to speak up. Because quite frankly, until people start speaking up when they see wrongdoing, that's the only hope, quite frankly, I believe, that our country has.
Well, as I say, I appreciate Dick talking about that. You met him in some programs that you and I did before, and he really got this idea going to the board when he heard Mike Oxley speak, as in Sarbanes-Oxley, which allegedly gave great protection to whistleblowers. And of course, we had a provision in Dodd-Frank in 2010 that allegedly gave great protection to whistleblowers. But that's one of the concerns that people have, Jim.
Exactly, and I think there's also a misconception, Tom, that whistleblowers, if they're successful, they leave with millions of dollars. And as you show in the book, that there's a huge personal toil and certainly not the financial windfall that some people assume that whistleblowers might get.
That's absolutely right, Jim. There's an enormous psychological toll. Quite often people feel that they've gone into this with the best interests of their organization at heart, and they've been punished for that. One whistleblower, Alan Jones, who blew the whistle on Johnson & Johnson and Risperidol, told me he finds it very difficult to trust anyone anymore because the entire world seemed to turn upside down for him. So it's certainly difficult psychologically, also financially. I guarantee you in the vast majority of cases, the best way to make a lot of money is to hunker down and get with the program, get with the fraud. Don't blow the whistle. Even if you're successful, in the vast majority of corporate whistleblowers are not successful in collecting any money whatsoever. Even if you are, you lose a large chunk of that settlement agreement payment to your lawyers. Uncle Sam takes another chunk. And remember, this is not a bounty. This is a net present value payment for the rest of your career, because in the vast majority of cases, corporate whistleblowers never work again in their chosen field. Their career is over. So seen from that point of view, whistleblower rewards seem to me not only a decent thing to do, but the only thing to do to allow people to come forward.
In your book, you cover so many different industries, ranging from defense, education, but I'd like you, if you could, to talk about the case with the Halifax Hospital, and just take 2 or 3 minutes and tell us how that unrolled.
Well, I think that's a perfect example. Ellen Backlund-Kuntz was in compliance. She had been in finance in Halifax Hospital, and she was just as proud as could be. She was an immigrant from Norway, had moved to Florida, and was just ever so proud to be a part of this organization. And she gradually began to see that what she had been seeing through the filter of finance, in other words, spreadsheets, was actually human beings. She started reading reports from the compliance department and announcements by people in the hospital saying, you know, we're doing things all wrong. There are serious problems with reimbursement procedures. In other words, we're overcharging the government, in essence. There was allegations of wrongful surgeries, all kinds of really bad things. And she did everything she could. She said, I would have done anything not to be a whistleblower. I tried everything I could. I gave it to my boss in compliance. I gave it to legal. I gave it to everyone's thinking that they had to do something. And ultimately, at the end of the day, she couldn't live with herself. She also felt, and we've talked about earlier, the concern that if in a culture where there's a lot of wrongdoing, there's also complicity and everyone has something on you. She also felt that if she didn't speak up, she might well go to jail for what was happening at the hospital. So it was a rich blend of difficult choices for her to make, but ultimately she did blow the whistle. She was successful in one prong of her False Claims Act case, but unsuccessful in another. In other words, the Department of Justice elected to settle out the second prong for a very small amount of money. And she too, she financially, she certainly did far better than the average whistleblower, but the emotional toll that it took on her was large, and she certainly doesn't have enough money never to work again. So net, she certainly would have been better off financially, just staying where she was and executing the game plan.
Thanks, Tom. Marianne, you said to me before, when you first read Tom's book, how did it make you feel?
A little depressed. You know, and I study this all the time, but it was a little depressing. But I just need to make a couple of clear points here. The last class, when I was teaching in the MBA program, the last class in my course was called, and infamously, the Hill You Die On class, which is, we go through all of the cultural issues and how to spot it and these kinds of things going on. So they have the good business history. And then we get to the point, is there ever a time when you just, okay, enough? And whistleblowing in a way can be as simple as walking away from a job. And I had one student who was working with Finova, which turned out to be a huge fraud in the Phoenix area. And he had contacted me during this time, and he said, you know, I'm seeing a lot of issues here. It was real estate and other kinds of things. And so we talked about it, and I said, perhaps the best thing for you is to just get out, because he didn't have enough to pull together. It wasn't really his area. It was just what he was seeing. And he said, I think you're right. And he left. The funny part of the story is he didn't sell his stock.
That's the sad part of the story. What do you mean funny?
And the company collapsed. He's still kind of bitter about this, but here's the crucial point we make in that discussion. If you leave when it's at its peak and you can't get anywhere, you at least have the credibility of having walked away. My other students who remained ended up being witnesses and those kinds of things. So that's another part of the story that needs to be told. And that hill you die on is for self-protection.
Well, exactly.
You know?
And one of the things that Dick Bowen talks about is that if you do everything you can internally, if you have a choice, you do whistleblowing, that's difficult and risky, or just get out so you're not part of the situation. Now, there are procedures, however, in companies and in governments to get this information out. Tell us a little bit about what those procedures are.
And what are the differences between government and the corporate sector?
Okay, well, I mean, whatever's going on in the corporate sector today is a result of the government, because the Defense Industry Initiative and all of the issues there with defense contracts, and Tom has all of this in his book. That's what really started it. They got their act together before companies did, and we just borrowed from that. And so companies have to have what I call the ethical infrastructure, which is a reporting system, the tracking, the investigation, all of those kinds of things. If they don't have that in place and they get in trouble, it's a higher penalty. So you have all of that. But I would add this to all of that technical. So there's really no difference. It exists the same way. There may be some more statutory protections in the government than there are in companies. But I think also there's something I learned from whistleblowers. The ones I interviewed all said the same thing. They'd still do it again. But there was another part that they shared with me, and they said they wished that they had taken the time, and this is part of the hill you die on, to help their coworkers understand why they were so worried about this. In other words, I teach them, you are in a business. Make the business case for this company to do the right thing, to come clean, whatever it is. Because when you do that, it's not you against the world. You may have a few converts along the way in your discussion. And they felt that maybe, and I don't think it's true in all cases, that maybe they had not done enough internally. So that there's a process, you go through that, there's the hierarchy, you go through that. But there's also a way to just say, okay, I know this person in this area, maybe if I talk to him or to her, I might make some headway. But I say you're far more employable if you can show, look, I didn't just go out there and tattle, you know, because we hate that. Snitches, narcs, we hate them all. I did everything I could to explain it. And the interesting thing about their documentation is they had put a business case together and say, we cannot continue on this path.
How has the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act provided a certain guardrail, and doesn't that work?
Well, it hasn't stopped bribery, if that's what you're asking me. It has not stopped bribery. But what it does is it gives other companies the opportunity in other countries, and as much as there is corruption in other countries, if there's a project and it's awarded to a certain company, competitors have no problem saying, but you need to look into this because this is what happened.
When was it enacted?
77 was when it was enacted, not without much noise, I might
And
add.
has it affected profitability of U.S. companies and their ability to compete?
No, actually, a study that was released about a decade after that said U.S. companies have actually done better under Foreign Corrupt Practices Act because everybody had to kind of clean up. And the idea that you would go into a country and curse them with what's holding them back economically is a sad thing. But they had a means for reporting these things, and it's still embarrassing, as corrupt as a country may be perceived to be. If it's gone public that there was this issue, they will rebid it, or they will banish that one from the kingdom. No more.
Thank you. Tom, you have 30 seconds to give us your last comment.
I think that whistleblowers are significantly different from those who resign and walk away from a situation, in that maybe they're naive, maybe they are idealistic, maybe they're crazy, as their colleagues say, but they actually want to fix it, fix this problem, whatever it takes. And they certainly feel a terrible collateral damage is being done to their friends in the process, but they can't live without trying to fix it.
Well, we appreciate the fact that you took the time to write this very interesting book. And Marianne, thank you for coming in from Arizona. Jim, thank you as always for being here as well. And we thank you. We hope that you will never experience fraud and ethical issues. But if you do, and you can't fix them, then whistleblowing may be for you. But be careful. Regardless of these supposed safeguards that are put in place by Sarbanes-Oxley and Dodd-Frank. Please visit McCuistionTV.com for the prior program on fraud. Follow us on Twitter and continue having us in to talk about things that matter with people who care.
For more information, call 214-750-5157 or email NikkiN@NikkiMcCuistion.com. Visit our website at www.McCuistionTV.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at www.twitter.com/McCuistionTV or download McCuistion TV video podcast on iTunes.